Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. Going a bit off format, and doing a mini review of this new Steven Wilson thing, The Future Bites. I did this when To the Bone came out, and I'm doing it again. Because I'm a longtime Steven Wilson Porcupine Tree fan, I felt like doing it. I would usually do this in like a car or something, but it's like -2 degrees outside, and I am not doing that. Also, I just had way too many thoughts on this thing to just sit back and let this pass by. I've watched several different videos from several different people, all with completely different takes on this album. Some positive, some negative, some lukewarm. There were parts of each one that I agreed with, but none that I've seen so far that entirely echo all of my own feelings. Or didn't at least have a point or two that had me like, I don't know about that. And the album itself has just been a very weird one for me to parse. Now, okay, so one thing that does need to be established right out the gate. I like this album. I like it quite a bit. But I'm also kind of conflicted on it. I've seen plenty of fellow Steven Wilson fans say they either hated it or at least found it to be a major letdown. I feel like I can totally understand that. I don't know if it's the kind of project I'd go out of my way to recommend to other people myself. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with the actual new stylistic direction that Wilson has taken here, moving even further away from his prog roots and making this kind of art pop album with much heavier electronic elements than he usually incorporates. So of course I gotta talk about it. Now, anyone disappointed at the lack of prog influences on this album, I don't feel like I can take much stock in. I, for one, always welcome an artist continuing to evolve their sound and try new things. Especially someone like Wilson, who, he's already been continually doing that since the beginning, and whose accessibility has been one of his greatest strengths for years as well. Now, that's not to say the direction he actually went in came together as effectively as I'd hoped for. First of all, he did have to give the whole project this social commentary angle and make it all a critique of modern society and consumerism and social media and all the rest of it. And while I don't think he says anything outright offensive, this whole aspect feels really played out, on the nose, and even kinda out of touch. Wilson's take on these themes is just the same old social media and consumerism dehumanize you crap that we've heard a million times, and the lyrics seem to think they're cutting on a way deeper level than they actually are. It's like the album I was afraid I was gonna get when DJ Shadow first announced Our Pathetic Age in 2019. Though that album turned out to actually be really good, and this one I didn't go in expecting any sort of, okay boomer sorts of takes, since Steven Wilson has explored similar themes on old projects like Hand Cannot Erase or Fear of a Blank Planet in much more effective and interesting ways. This just doesn't hit on the same level or say anything new or interesting that we haven't heard before. But on the other hand, there's also the new instrumental direction, which seems to have been pretty controversial in its own right. And this is the point at which I will have to defend the record. I didn't find the stiffer and more synthetic grooves on this album to be to its detriment, personally. Led to a lot of interesting moments here that don't remind me of anything else I've heard from Wilson before. Now, I haven't heard any of his projects with, No Man, and I've been told he's explored similar territory there, but still, I thought most of the grooves came together really well in a way I could get into, and the actual pop hooks were really well crafted as well. I've had some of these tracks stuck in my head for days, especially Self. If anything, I kinda wish he had leaned more into this electronic art pop direction than he actually did. Between the stranger and more electronic-leaning cuts and the more ordinary rock tunes on this thing, it did lead to this project not really coalescing together as a greater whole as it could have. And the more electronic cuts, surprise, they tended to be among my favorites. I thought the brittle and off-kilter grooves of Eminent Sleaze were really fun. I thought Follower had a lot of rollicking energy to it. It kind of reminded me of tracks like People Who Eat Darkness from To the Bone, even if not as good as that one. I thought the synthetic vocal manipulations and synth pastiches of King Ghost came together in a surprisingly beautiful way. And say what you will about Self, that track is inhumanly catchy. I could put this album down for several months and I feel like I'd still be easily able to recall that hook. But for me, easily the biggest highlight had to be Personal Shopper. Heavy-handedness of the lyrics aside, I thought the core hooks were absolutely killer, the dance beats particularly hard-hitting, and somehow finding some playfulness in their menacing corporate stiffness. And that whole segment with Elton John listing off consumer products and talking about self-doubt and self-indulgence and that kind of stuff, that was a nice touch as well. It made very good use of its almost 10 minutes and got it to zip by super quick. I don't care what anyone says, I absolutely love that track. But again, there are also some tracks here that just sound very typical for Steven Wilson and don't stick out too much. 12 Things I Forgot and Man of the People, they're perfectly serviceable and enjoyable while they're on. But there's like 50 other tracks he's done, both solo and with Porcupine Tree, that do the same kind of stuff better. To the Bone by itself had like 6-7 other tracks that stick out more in my mind than those. Unself is a pointless and forgettable tacked-on album intro, and god, Count of Unease is just such a dull, weak, limp shell of an ending that closes things out on a really anticlimactic note. The final effect is that this album ends up feeling really fragmented and all over the place. The kind of project that I'd be a lot more willing to come back to for specific individual moments than listen to all at once. It's definitely not one of my favorite Steven Wilson solo projects. I haven't listened to Insurgents in years. I remember that project at least coming together better as a whole and feeling more complete and less undercooked or fragmented than this one. But at the same time, I also barely remember anything from that project, aside from feeling like a not as good version of some of those later period Porcupine Tree albums like The Incident, and just kind of being on the tedious side as a whole. I think I'd still probably give the edge to this one, because if nothing else, the standouts on here are going to stick in my mind way more. It's definitely not a forgettable project. So, I guess take that all as you will. If you hate this album, I get it. I definitely would not place it among the best he's ever done. But I had fun with it all the same, so yeah. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me reviews, then link to my Patreon's in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.